Right now, 70 boats are sitting in the port of Barcelona, and they are heavily loaded with civilian activists and supplies, basically preparing to sail directly into an active, highly volatile Israeli naval blockade.
Yeah, and at the exact same time, literally half a world away, the United States Vice President is sitting down with intermediaries in Pakistan, essentially pleading to keep global oil lanes open so the international economy doesn't just, capsize.
It's wild when you put those two images side by side.
It is the absolute definition of a strategic chain reaction. A localized border dispute in the Levant has systematically drawn in regional proxies, which in turn has drawn in global superpowers, and ultimately that disrupts the supply chains that dictate everyday life globally.
Right. The map lines are no longer static. They are actively shifting beneath our feet.
Exactly.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 30th, 2026. Welcome to a new deep dive into the source material, where we are examining a very critical question today. Can Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon find peace?
It's a heavy topic, but we're going to break it down calmly and objectively.
We are. And before we begin, we just want to extend a quick thank you to our sponsor, ProWave AI. This deep dive is generated utilizing Stylo News, which is an AI-powered news application.
And what makes this particularly relevant for you, the listener, is the architecture behind Stylo News. It's actually the consumer version of the Stylo Intel Ops software.
Which is usually just for the big players, right?
Right, exactly. It's a tool originally designed for enterprise operations across government, military, and business sectors. So you are getting unique access to the exact same intelligence-style briefing formats used by global decision makers.
Which is incredibly helpful when you're trying to cut through the noise of international conflict.
It really is.
So our mission today is to neutrally and objectively unpack the primary patterns of events in the Middle East over the past 2 weeks. We are looking at local, national, and international impacts.
And we'll examine the perspectives of the key decision makers involved and explore the potential courses of action based on a very diverse stack of Stylo intelligence estimates and regional reporting.
Yeah, we are delivering the facts here, clearly and calmly. No fear-mongering, just the data, so you can understand the actual mechanics of what is happening on the ground.
And a measured approach is just essential right now. I mean, the volume of information coming out of the region is staggering, and it's heavily fractured along ideological lines.
Absolutely fractured.
So we really need to separate the signal from the noise. And I think that the best place to start is with the reality on the ground in Gaza, exactly 6 months after the October 2025 ceasefire implementation.
Right. And looking at the intelligence estimates, they present a pretty grim picture of that ceasefire. I mean, the peace process is heavily stalled.
Yeah, stalled is almost an understatement.
Israel has established a very firm red line. They are demanding complete Hamas disarmament as a strict, non-negotiable prerequisite before any large-scale international reconstruction can even begin.
And they're enforcing that red line tactically. They're currently conducting what they call Operation Roaring Lion.
Which is happening right now.
Right now. The stated objective here is the targeted degradation of Hamas infrastructure in Gaza, and this is running concurrently with operations against Hezbollah up in Lebanon.
But the IDF intelligence reports indicate kind of a conflicting reality on the ground, right?
Yeah, they do. They assess that Hamas is actively utilizing this exact 6-month ceasefire window to rebuild its military wing and to firmly retain civil administrative control over the Strip.
Which obviously complicates the Israeli objective.
Yeah.
Now, in response to that pressure, Hamas actually put forward a counterproposal.
They did, yeah.
The sources show they offered a partial disarmament. Specifically, they proposed handing over thousands of small arms that are currently utilized by Gaza's civil police forces.
Right, the police weapons.
But I'm looking at the mechanics of this offer, and it seems, well, strategically hollow. I mean, handing over police small arms while keeping the main military infrastructure, the tunnel networks, the heavy weaponry intact. It feels a bit like a bank robber turning in the keys to the getaway car, but, keeping the combination to the vault.
It's actually worse than that. It's turning in the getaway car, but keeping the vault combination and a heavily armed crew just waiting in the wings.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Israel views the civil police arms as basically a statistical rounding error. From the Israeli decision-making perspective, any rebuilding of Hamas's core military capability for the vault, in your analogy, is a direct, unacceptable security threat.
So they don't buy the partial disarmament at all?
Not even a little. They argue that partial disarmament is just a smokescreen, and that it requires preemptive military action to prevent a return to the pre-conflict status quo. Israel's position is absolute here. The broader military apparatus must be dismantled before a single yard of concrete is poured for rebuilding.
Meanwhile, Hamas strictly links any full disarmament to a complete Israeli military withdrawal from the territory, and they want ironclad international guarantees for reconstruction attached to that.
Right, they draw a very hard line between civil policing and armed resistance. They view the retention of their primary military assets as, well, their only viable leverage at the negotiating table.
Right, so while this high-level political maneuvering remains totally deadlocked, there's actually a critical, localized political shift happening on the ground.
Yes, the elections.
Exactly. Historic municipal elections just took place in the West Bank and in Gaza's Deir al-Balah, which is wild because this is the first time in 2 decades we have seen this level of civic voting in these areas.
And holding municipal elections in the middle of a stalled peace process with a devastated infrastructure, I mean, it's a massive logistical challenge.
Oh, totally. But it serves as a crucial barometer, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The Palestinian Authority, along with international observers, they are using these local elections to measure Hamas's actual popularity. They want to see their true civil authority among the population amid this ongoing conflict.
Right, it's a real-time test of public trust in governance under extreme ongoing duress.
And that duress cannot be overstated. The delay in the political and military arenas is translating into severe, compounding consequences on the ground for civilians.
And because of that, the international community is beginning to actively fracture over how to respond to the sheer scale of the humanitarian toll.
Yeah, let's look at the numbers. They paint a really stark picture. According to reports from UN Women, over 38,000 women and girls were killed by the end of 2025.
That's just a staggering figure.
It is, and despite the official ceasefire that was implemented last October, the violence just hasn't stopped. Over 790 Palestinians have been killed since that agreement supposedly took effect.
And then there's the physical destruction of the territory, which is structurally overwhelming. I mean, we're looking at a joint assessment by the UN and the EU that places the total cost of Gaza's reconstruction at $71.4 billion over the next decade.
Yeah, and just to put that in perspective for a second, they estimate $26.3 billion is required just in the first 18 months.
Just to start.
Just to start. Merely to clear rubble, stabilize the subterranean infrastructure, and restore the absolute most basic essential services. The local economy hasn't just contracted, it has completely collapsed by 84%.
Wow. Which brings us to a highly contentious piece of source reporting regarding exactly how that infrastructure is being degraded.
The MSF report.
Right. Doctors Without Borders, or MSF, released a report titled Water as a Weapon. They document that 90% of Gaza's water and sanitation infrastructure has been destroyed, but they go further than that.
They do. They make a very specific allegation.
Yes, they allege that civilian water trucks are being specifically targeted, creating what they call an engineered scarcity. And the mechanics of this are vital to understand because destroying utility infrastructure forces mass population movement. I mean, people cannot stay where there is no water.
Right. Now, the Israeli government firmly denies the MSF allegation of collective punishment or engineered scarcity.
So what is their counter-argument?
They insist their military operations are highly targeted security measures aimed exclusively at militant infrastructure. Israel argues that Hamas deliberately embeds its operations, its weapons caches, command centers directly within civilian utility infrastructure.
They're basically turning the grid into a battlefield.
Exactly. Turning water and power grids into active, highly complicated battlefields.
Well, the dispute over those battlefield tactics is actively fracturing international diplomacy right now, particularly within the European Union.
Oh, the EU is deeply divided on this.
Right. The consensus is breaking apart based on the different historical and geopolitical lenses of the member states. For instance, you have Spain and Ireland pushing aggressively for formal sanctions on Israel, citing the humanitarian situation and international law.
Conversely, you have Germany and Italy who are strongly opposing any sanctions. They are arguing for constructive dialogue and really prioritizing Israel's overarching security concerns.
So they view the military operations differently.
Yeah, they view them as a harsh but necessary response to an embedded non-state threat.
And that diplomatic rift just had a severe real-world consequence. In response to Spain's vocal criticism and their push for those EU sanctions, Israel officially expelled Spain from the Gaza Civil Military Coordination Center.
Which is a huge deal. That is not just a diplomatic snub, it is a major operational disruption.
Break that down for us. Why does that matter on the ground?
Well, it fundamentally alters the logistics of survival. The coordination center is basically the central nervous system for deconfliction. It manages exactly how international aid physically enters the territory.
Okay.
Yeah, it ensures military movements are separated from humanitarian convoys. So, expelling a major European partner like Spain removes a layer of international oversight and drastically increases the operational friction for getting those aid trucks through checkpoints safely.
It also appears to be a catalyst for direct civilian intervention. Earlier, we mentioned the global Sumud flotilla. Over 70 boats have set sail from Barcelona.
Right, heavily loaded.
Heavily loaded. These are vessels carrying activists and aid, aiming directly for the Gaza blockade. And the mechanics of intercepting a civilian flotilla in a highly militarized naval blockade zone, I mean, that is incredibly delicate.
It's a deliberate provocation. It's designed to force a physical, highly public confrontation at sea.
And if you look at the social media and the source sentiment surrounding these events, the ideological divide is just absolute.
Night and day.
Right. Audiences leaning toward the UN and MSF, reports following sources like Free Malaysia. Today, for example, they focus almost exclusively on the humanitarian crisis, the flotilla, and the potential international law violations.
But then, if you flip the algorithm and look at sources like the Jerusalem Post or Israel National News, the sentiment focuses on the very real security threats.
A completely different framing.
Totally different. They highlight how Hamas is exploiting the ceasefire to rebuild, and they frame the European criticism, particularly from countries like Spain, as politically motivated posturing rather than objective analysis.
It's a perfect example of why we have to look at all the sources neutrally. But this friction over Gaza's borders and the subsequent international fallout, it isn't happening in a vacuum.
No, not at all.
Israel's hardline stance on Hamas in the south is directly dictating their preemptive, zero-tolerance military posture in the north against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yeah, let's shift to Lebanon, because mid-April saw the announcement of a fragile 10-day ceasefire there.
But looking at the daily intelligence briefs, it is highly unstable.
Highly unstable. Despite the official truce framework, the tit-for-tat violence just hasn't stopped. Hezbollah has launched drone strikes, and Israel has conducted retaliatory strikes deep into southern Lebanon.
And they're issuing civilian evacuation warnings, right?
Exactly. And the operational environment there recently crossed a critical threshold with a major force protection incident. A French UNIFIL soldier who is part of the mandated UN peacekeeping force was killed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This dramatically elevates the threat matrix. It demonstrates that Western uniformed personnel and international peacekeepers are no longer insulated from the active hostilities. They are caught in the crossfire.
And I am looking at the diplomatic response from the Lebanese government here, specifically President Joseph Aoun. His rhetoric is hardening significantly against Hezbollah.
It is, at least publicly.
Right. He is framing their independent military actions as illegal, and he's aligning with U.S.-backed diplomacy to disarm the group. But looking at the actual power structures in the country, the Lebanese armed forces seem, well, completely hollowed out.
They are. They have no coercive power to stop Hezbollah.
So it feels like a rhetorical facade designed to appease Western diplomats rather than a statement of actual sovereign intent.
You are identifying the core paradox of the modern Middle East right there.
Yeah.
The international community is forced to deal with non-state actors, like Hezbollah, that possess state-level military capabilities.
Like advanced rocketry, drone swarms.
Organized infantry, exactly. But they have none of the state-level international accountability.
So if the Lebanese government is officially at the negotiating table, but unofficially powerless to enforce anything on their own territory, who is Israel actually forming a ceasefire with?
Essentially no one.
No one.
No one. Israel is operating strictly under a security zone logic. They are acting preemptively to clear threats near their northern border because they physically cannot rely on the Lebanese state to maintain a monopoly on violence.
And how does Hezbollah frame all of this?
Hezbollah frames itself as a victorious deployed resistance. They view their military actions as legitimate defense of Lebanese sovereignty, and they utterly reject any unilateral disarmament.
So this 10-day ceasefire is less a formal treaty between states and more just a temporary, highly volatile pause in tactical engagements.
Exactly.
Which begs a larger question. With Gaza stalled, Lebanon teetering on the edge of conventional war, and the humanitarian crisis compounding day by day, why isn't the entirety of the international community's diplomatic weight focused on resolving this Levant corridor?
Because their attention and resources are heavily diluted by a massive overarching standoff between the United States and Iran.
Yeah, okay. The macro picture.
Right. If we pull the analytical lens back, The tension driving the entire region right now is this U.S.-Iran dynamic. The Trump administration has brokered a fragile ceasefire with Iran, but the structural tensions remain critically high.
And it's playing out aggressively on the water. There is an active U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports. And in direct retaliation to that, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz.
And the closure of that specific waterway is the trigger for an immediate global energy crisis.
Because of the oil.
Right. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical transit choke point for crude oil and liquefied natural gas.
To understand the diplomatic bandwidth issue here, I like to think of the international community like a triage nurse in an emergency room.
That's a good way to look at it.
Right. The stalled peace plan in Gaza and the border skirmishes in Lebanon are serious long-term injuries like a broken arm. But the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a severed artery.
Yeah, the U.S. and regional mediators cannot fix a broken arm while the global economy is actively bleeding out from an energy crisis.
Exactly. And that triage is why U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance is currently scheduled to travel to Pakistan. He is heading there for diplomatic talks with Iranian intermediaries.
Using Pakistan as neutral ground.
Right. Pakistan is being utilized due to its complex historical ties and proximity, serving as that neutral ground to try and ease this massive geopolitical bottleneck.
And the ripple effect of this triage hits the Levant directly, because the United States, along with key regional mediators like Egypt and Qatar, are entirely consumed by the macro-level economic and security impacts of the Iran standoff.
Leaving the micro-level issues frozen.
Totally frozen. The U.S.-led Board of Peace for Gaza, which currently holds $7 billion in international pledges for stabilization, is completely stalled out.
The diplomatic machinery simply cannot process both crises simultaneously.
It just can't.
Now, for you listening right now, this is where the geopolitical chessboard connects directly to your daily life.
Yeah, this isn't just distant news.
No, you might wonder why a border dispute thousands of miles away matters. It matters because the friction in the Levant fueled the U.S.-Iran standoff, which led to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And that closure impacts global shipping lanes, which skyrockets the cost of energy.
Right. That energy spike directly drives international inflation, raising the price of the groceries you buy, the gas you put in your car, and the goods delivered to your door. Geopolitics isn't just an abstract map. It is the supply chain of your everyday existence.
It perfectly illustrates the deep interconnectivity of these systems. A localized conflict demands immense international resources, and when those resources are diverted to secure global trade routes, the localized conflict festers,
creating a devastating feedback loop.
Exactly.
So we have unpacked the mechanisms of the current situation. Let's look at the future projections. What are the most likely upcoming events that our listeners need to watch for?
Well, first, definitely monitor the imminent arrival of the global Samud flotilla at the Gaza blockade. Watch exactly how the Israeli Navy intercepts those 70 civilian boats.
Because they will intercept them.
They will, and critically, watch how the fractured European Union reacts to that interception. It is a flashpoint that forces a public response.
Second, keep a close eye on Vice President J.D. Vance's talks in Pakistan. The outcome of those specific negotiations regarding the Iran ceasefire and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz will dictate the baseline stability of global energy markets for the remainder of the year.
Third, analyze the post-election governance in Gaza and the West Bank. The results of the Deir al-Balah municipal elections will be very telling.
Right. Will we see a smooth transition, indicating a population ready for new civic leadership?
Or will the results show that Hamas has successfully utilized the ceasefire to further entrench its civil control? We have to watch the data there.
Finally, watch the Lebanon ceasefire expiry. It is only a 10-day window. You really need to monitor if the current drone and artillery strikes in southern Lebanon escalate into a broader conventional ground war once that truce officially closes.
And the trigger for that escalation would likely be a mass casualty event on either side of the border.
Ultimately, global decision-makers are facing a severe, intractable dilemma here.
They really are. They must choose between supporting continued military pressure to force the total disarmament of non-state actors like Hamas and Hezbollah, or accepting partial disarmament like the Hamas police weapons proposal.
Which is a tough pill to swallow.
It is. Accepting partial disarmament unlocks the $71 billion reconstruction effort and might stabilize the region enough to ease the global energy markets, but it leaves the core security threats intact.
There are no easy choices, only highly complex trade-offs.
Exactly.
It is a phenomenal amount of interlocking intelligence to process. But understanding those mechanics is exactly why we do these deep dives. As a reminder, if you want to run these kinds of analyses for yourself and cut through the media noise, Stylo News is available as both a mobile and computer app.
It's a great platform. It allows you to download and customize personal intelligence-style briefs, drawing from hundreds of traditional news sources in X.
Right. You can take control of your information diet, subscribe, and get AI-powered news on demand at www.stylonews.com.
It truly is a remarkable tool for staying ahead of the curve and really understanding the why behind the headlines.
It absolutely is. We want to thank you so much for tuning in today. We always appreciate you taking the time to explore the nuances of these critical global events with us. Feel free to request topics for future deep dives, and be sure to follow Stylo News on your favorite social media platforms.
Yeah, we love hearing what complex systems you want us to unpack next.
Now, before we sign off, we want to leave you with a fascinating, slightly unorthodox piece of data from the source material.
Oh, this is interesting.
It really is. Amidst all the hard geopolitical intelligence, the satellite imagery of naval blockades, and the billions of dollars in economic estimates, a psychic named Jessica Adams recently published a prediction.
Not our usual data source.
No, definitely not. But she stated that by mid-2026, the world map will see significant permanent border changes driven specifically by the cascading effects of the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine.
It is certainly a stark contrast to a traditional intelligence report, but it echoes a very real shared global anxiety about the fragility of the current international order.
Exactly. And whether you put your faith in psychic predictions or hard empirical intelligence data, it brings us right back to the shifting map lines we discussed at the top of the broadcast.
It does.
It leaves you with a profound question to mull over. Are we currently witnessing a temporary, albeit incredibly violent flare-up of historical grievances? Or are we watching the literal permanent redrawing of the Middle East borders for generations to come?
That is something to carefully consider as the next few weeks unfold.
Until next time, stay informed.